it's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story Podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, it's Ivy Slater. Welcome to this episode of Her Success Story. So for those of you who are just tuning in or not yet regulars on Her Success Story, you are tuning in at the right time. We are in the midst of an amazing series. This series is all about the impact of women in the boardroom, women on boards. This has been a passionate thing for me. It's been something for about 9 to 12 months. I've been working with my team saying, I want to do this series. Women are making a huge impact in the world. We need to know what this is and how it transcends to women on boards. And today I have an expert with me, Deb Pine. So Deb's background here is just so damn interesting. I'm going to read you a smattering of her bio, but I'm going to be honest. You could read the bio in the show notes because Deb has so much to share. So Deb is the executive director of the Center for Women and Business and Executive Education at Bentley University. She leads an external and internal strategic efforts, including corporate engagement, student initiatives, faculty collaboration, and research. Deb is also a skilled facilitator and has led and leads sessions at Harvard Business School, as well as the Broad Institute. She also does an enormous amount of work with Verizon, Clark, TripAdvisor, just to name a few. Now let's get through into now I'm skipping paragraphs. This is how brilliant and how much she's done to what I want to get into because, hey, her success story is all about Ivy. Deb is committed to furthering progress towards corporate gender equality and is an active mentor and advisor to several women-led businesses. She's a member of the Harvard Business School Women's Association and Boston Club. Deb has so much more in her bio, in her accomplishments. You might have seen her at the Massachusetts Conference for Women, which is a huge conference in this country, as well as in many other things. But I'm thrilled to be able to share this time with Deb and learn more about, Deb, your passion and commitment to women on boards.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction.
So tell us a little bit, I always say, let's get, before there's so much practical stuff I know you're going to share, but let's get into the backstory first a little bit. So how did you get involved in this and why are you so committed to this? Why is this important to you?
Well, I came to Bentley University 3 years ago because there was a real opportunity. We have a unique center, the Center for Women in Business, which is, our mission is really, we're dedicated to advancing women in workplace diversity. And we say from the classroom to the boardroom. So we work along every part of the pipeline to try to keep women and underrepresented categories advancing. And we know that that's a struggle for a number of different reasons. So I think there's nothing more important than focusing on advancing gender diversity in corporations. It's not only the right thing to do, it's the smart business thing to do. Research we could spend the whole half hour talking about how the research supports when we have greater representation of women and diverse candidates at every level of the pipeline. We have greater financial returns, greater engagement, and greater innovation. So it's something I'm passionate about.
So, you just said that really quickly, and I appreciate, because I know we want to get a lot of content in, but just because for the people who've not been listening to the whole series, there's a couple of highlights here I want you to just say again. So when we have a greater diverse board, what are some of the things we're seeing here in the diversity side? So when we have more women on the boards,
yep.
What's this impact?
So what we're seeing is research really shows that organizations with greater levels of gender diversity have stronger financial performance and results. In fact, Reuters did a study and they showed that average stock prices of gender diverse boards outperform those with no women. Not only
that's huge.
As I said, we could spend the whole half hour talking about the research, but in addition to sort of the financial results and the business returns, what we find is that organizations that have women on boards and with greater representation have fewer governance-related issues, including shareholder battles and fraud. And female directors also tend to change the boardroom conversations. They're more likely than their male counterparts to talk about things like social issues, like human rights, climate change, income inequality. So not only is it they're the financial metrics that we can look to, but also the development of the culture of the organization.
Nice. So what drove you personally here to get involved in this?
Well, it probably came from early on in my career. One of the first jobs I had out of college was working for an organization that was literally run by 4 fraternity brothers. And so I was
I love it. I love it. It's not what you would expect. It's like, okay, so I got
so as it was clear from that organization that women were not represented, their voices were not being heard. And so that's something that's just stuck with me. And now that I've, progressed in my career and, had a successful startup and a successful exit and worked in academia, I feel like it's a real opportunity for me to share that learning and to give back and to help make a difference and move the needle forward for women.
So what do you see in the difference when you see women more involved on boards? And, we have the big financial perspective and all of that, but, you guide and help women, everything, from how do we get started of looking at boards, and why has this become a driven mission to you?
Well, because it often starts at the top, right? If you've got the very most senior leadership and the board focusing on diversity and inclusion, it permeates throughout the organization if it's successful. And, there's one thing about having diversity on the board and women on the boards, but you also have to make sure that those voices are being heard. So interesting other research shows that having one woman on the board she's looked at as a token and not taken seriously. The second woman on a board is able to echo the comments of the first woman, but there's a tipping point about having 3 women on the board, because then they really become a force of reckoning. And these boards are large and tend to be male dominated, so sometimes you need that to have the voice.
So it starts with the number 3 is what I'm hearing you say.
Right. But I would also say, there are a number of organizations that have no women on the boards. Half of the S&P 500s last year added no directors in total. So there were no openings for women. So we have some issues around, board governance and seats available as well.
Is there a way to create change there?
Yes. So I think that there's three things boards need to do to create change. First of all, I think they have to cast a wider net and focus on skills and experience for potential board members rather than just titles. Because
I'm going to reiterate here. So skills and experience.
Right, as opposed to title. Because right now, most of the board seats are being offered to sitting or retired CEOs or CFOs. And if you think of how many women CEOs are there, women hold only 5% of CEO roles, and only 0.6% of those are women of color. So the pool has to be widened. So we have to look at what are the critical skills that are needed for that board. The second thing is term limits. Only 4% of the S&P 500 boards have term limits, meaning, boy, is this going to be glacial change if nobody's leaving, right? If we're not opening up some new seats. So they have to really look at adding new seats and putting in term limits. And in fact, Bloomberg did a study where they said, if you're familiar with California, they adopted a law that would require women on boards. And that Bloomberg study said that if every state adopted the California law, it would open up 3,732 seats for women.
3,732 seats for women
in a couple of years. If everybody if every state adopted the law that California is, which is one woman on the board, next year, and so on.
And
So,
that's just one woman
right,
per board,
right,
not the 2 or 3,
right.
or actually, what if we looked at 50%?
Right. Well, that's right. That's the big one, right? And I would just also say the third thing that boards need to do, which I think is really fascinating, is that they need to make diversity a priority. Heidrick and Struggles did a study, and it said that 46% of U.S. directors say that board diversity is a priority. So unless we're making it a priority, it's never going to become a priority, right? So recognizing its importance, making it a priority, looking to focus on skills rather than titles, and considering term limits are the 3 things that I think boards need to do to try to make this change.
So, I have so much I want to ask. In starting to affect change today, so, okay, we wish in 2019, we could create a movement and have 1 woman on every board. We'd like to create a movement to have 3 women on every board. What are some of the, change starts with baby steps.
Right. Well, I think, I talked a little bit about what boards can do, but I think there are things that women can do, right? To prepare ourselves.
Right. I think that's important, because unless women are saying, okay, I'm going to be the leader who, I'm going to put this on my goal list, I'm going to put this in my career path.
Right.
So where do women get started? I love this stream.
Well, the first thing I would say is we need to start women thinking about this early. By the time women are director levels, SVPs, okay, they're better prepared, but we need to set in our young women's minds the information about what is a board, why you should care, what boards are responsible for, and what you need to do to be on boards. We at the Center for Women in Business, we have programs for our students. We also have executive education leadership programs where I literally give a session where we talk about what is a board, how do you get on one, and have a panel discussion. So really starting the dialogue so women can see themselves, envision themselves in these roles, right? That's step number 1. And, that will take some time. But then I often point to 4 things that women should consider if they want to get themselves ready to be on a board. The first thing I say is get educated. What do I mean by that? Figure out what it means to be on a board. There are a number of board readiness programs that exist throughout the country. There are programs, there's 2020 Women on Boards. We can talk a little bit about that initiative. So there's board certification, board readiness programs, and I also have a handout, some information if anybody wanted to email me directly, dpine@bentley.edu, that lists all the different board readiness programs that exist out there.
There's a variety, and ladies and gentlemen who are listening to this, because I think the gentlemen are going to be weighing in, because you want the women surrounding you to be involved here. You want your daughters to know about this. When Deb's gives out her email and you can reach right out to her, she truly means this, and it's all going to be in the show notes. So if you are worried that you're going to miss, I need that contact information again, it's here for you.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So get educated, I'd say, is number 1. The second one is get prepared. Make sure you know as an individual how to read a P&L, how to run a P&L, develop your skills in governance and business strategy. So get educated, get prepared. Third is get networked. 70% of people still find their board positions through word of mouth. Tell your mentors, tell your sponsors. There are a number of search firms that have board placement practices, Russell Reynolds, Korn Ferry, Heidrick and Struggles. Some of the resources that I have here, like the Boston Club, have databases that you can enter your resume in to say that you are interested in boards. So get educated, get prepared, get networked, and lastly, get your story out there. Tell folks in your circle, in your network, that you're interested in being on boards. Whether you mention it on your LinkedIn, you tell your bankers, M&A people. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, I got a call from a colleague of mine that I haven't worked with in over 10 years who said, I'm looking to put a woman on my board. Do you have some recommendations? And so I could go through my Rolodex and say, I know this person, and this person are all interested in being on board. So get educated, get prepared, get networked, and get your story out there.
And for women who are curious about it, a great way to start building that network is to be asking people. I'd like to have conversations. I'd just like to do some informational interviews with women on boards.
Absolutely.
Or with people on boards that look like this, because that's building your network and building those relationships.
Right. And organizations across the country have a lot of events in either board readiness or panel discussions. There is an organization called 2020 Women on Boards, which is a nonprofit organization. We have always been big supporters, and every November there's one day, this year it's November 14th, where 20 sites across the country hold a national conversation to raise awareness about the importance of women on boards and gives women tips on how to be on boards and gives you a networking opportunity. So I would encourage folks across the country to check out 2020 Women on Boards for their local site. We at Bentley are the Massachusetts site, and other associations often have board readiness programs as well. So whatever professional association you're in, that's another way to look.
And in our series, we're going to be speaking to some people from 2020 Women on Boards.
Fabulous. They're fabulous people. We're big supporters.
Fabulous people, great interview. As you gain knowledge and listen to the different components of this series, you can start creating an agenda for yourself of what you can do.
Exactly.
So in making this happen and women working together, what is the dynamic that you have learned, seen, observed, been part of when we look at the dynamic difference with men and women on boards?
You know, I think it really comes down to the nature of the conversations that are happening in the boardroom, assuming that everybody has an equal voice. I mean, they tend to be more collaborative in their discussions, and it becomes a culture towards greater questioning as opposed to accepting the status quo. And again, you know, the research shows diversity of thought and it leads to better business results across the board.
It's so true, and I think it's important when we look at diversity of thought that many of us, so if you do something just simply, if you were raised in parts of California versus parts of New York, you have a different perspective.
Right.
We come from different backgrounds.
Exactly.
And that's just demographics of where you were raised. As the demographics continue to differ, perspectives get broader and broader, and people show up with their background, their insight, their level of curiosity.
Yep.
And that's where this all launches from. And that's why we need the diversity in everything.
And, you know, we've talked a lot about how the organization will benefit from diverse boards, but there's a lot as an individual board member that you take away in terms of what you get out of it. I mean, certainly there's the compensation part, and we can talk about the different structures, whether it's a corporate board, a nonprofit board, or just an advisory board. But, you know, the reason I have participated in boards, both nonprofit and private company boards, is because, first of all, you know, it's a way for me to give back my expertise where I think I could really add value in a relatively limited amount of time. But also, it exposes you to such a broader network, to your point earlier. I mean, you get to sit on boards with folks that may not already be in your circle, like scientists in one of the nonprofits that I sit on, and data analysts, and you know, so it really expands your network as well, which is good for your career. So it's rewarding in that way as well.
So Deb, if we can, let's get personal a little bit here. What have you seen personally? Like you said, you sit on a board with a scientist. How have, you know, let's share this perspective, if you're open to, for Deb Pine, what have you seen and what do you care? What do you do? What are you doing?
Well, I'll talk a little bit about one in particular board that I've participated in. And it's been interesting because sometimes folks with different backgrounds, have their perspective, but might not have the business perspective, like in this medical products nonprofit that I'm talking about. So I find that I'm often the one asking the questions, the harder questions, as opposed to just rubber stamping. But maybe that's more my personal style than anything. But I really like to engage the group in conversations and knowing that we all can't be expert in everything, but how can we tap each individual for what their expertise is and engage in a conversation around that?
Love that. So tell me, is there anything we haven't covered that you think would be helpful for our listeners to know?
Well, we focused a lot of our discussion on corporate boards, but what I find is when I'm talking to women executives in the work we do here at the center is there's not a real understanding about the difference of boards, that there are advisory boards, which are, not necessarily governance, but they're helping companies, usually smaller companies, get to the next level. And the compensation for that is usually stock or some small fee. There's nonprofit boards, which tend to be focused on, being related and mission driven and being committed to that mission. And often those are unpaid, or they actually are looking for you to make a contribution to be on that board, but it's a great stepping stone for being on boards. And then there are corporate boards, which can be very lucrative, have larger governance issues, and more compensation and more sort of liability or risk in terms of that. So when you think about how would you start out to be on a board, be very thoughtful about where you get that experience, because I think it's harder to jump into having no board experience to being on a Fortune 500 board. So think about building your experience through maybe a small bank board or a nonprofit board to get you started, so you get familiar with the governance issues and how things operate and what the different committees are and how you can add most value.
I love that, and that's very true. There are a variety of different boards, and make the decision to get involved. Make the decision to get started. I love, Deb, that you're saying you're calling our young listeners to action here. We don't know where we're going to be in 5, 10, or 20 years, but we all have the ability to say, this is one of the things that's important to me that I know I want to be able to do. So in order to do that, we start learning and training. And I always, think about that as a dancer. From my early years. I didn't know where I would be in my 50s, yet the training I did in my young years, I'll just call it young years, okay, teens through college, etc., still today has an impact on what I'm doing. So it's about us making the decision and always learning and always getting insight and getting that knowledge. Right. There's an amazing amount of resources. Deb, share with us how our listeners can learn more, stay in contact with you, and give you a follow. Well,
the listeners can find out more about the programs that we do at the CWB at bentley.edu. So Center for Women in Business, CWB at bentley.edu. And if you would like a copy of the board readiness resources that I referenced, you can contact me directly, Deb Pine at bentley.edu. And I would be happy to share our learnings with the audience.
Fabulous. Ladies, gentlemen, share the insight, share this series forward. Let's start making a difference and have more women on boards. Let's lead with the California initiative across this country and diversify, see big change in our world. Deb, I cannot thank you enough. I know how much you have on your plate and how busy you are. Thank you for taking the time and joining me here on Her Success Story. And I encourage all of you to stay connected to Deb and see what Bentley is doing, see what the Center for Women is all about, because this is all how we make a difference. Give it an explore and find out the information.
Thank you so much, Ivy. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, listeners. Remember, subscribe to Her Success Story and feel free to leave a review, a comment, and some insight for Deb and myself in the comments.